Hello, I'm Kevin Newman. One of the great surprises in building Get Fact was coming across research in conspiratorial thinking in Canada. It is much more prevalent than we thought. Canadians are just as likely to believe in a conspiracy as Americans are now. COVID did that to us. And at the same time, as we have become more susceptible to doubt, the defenses provided by institutions have eroded. Journalism in Canada, as you know, is pretty much emaciated now. Government has created some warning systems, but no way to fight back. Well, someone who has been at the forefront of studying this phenomenon, working within it, and trying to come up with ways of strengthening that level of discourse is my guest today. Farhaan Ladhani is a senior fellow at the Munk School of Public Policy and Global Affairs. He has worked in various communications roles inside government in Ottawa, at our embassy in Washington, and for a while in Kandahar during the Afghan War. Today, he is CEO of Goodbit, which is trying to improve the health of our information ecosystem. Well, welcome, Farhaan.
Nice to see you, Kevin.
I know you did a ton of work during COVID about, misinformation and disinformation. Where do you think the health of the ecosystem is now? Did we recover from that to some degree, or are we still there and can't find our way out?
That's a great question. What I would say is that we're still recovering, and I think that there's a long adjustment phase. In the information environment, I think that's because the changes just keep coming. Like if you just think about where we were in 2020 and where we are today, think about the tools that you're using today to get information. In 2020, you weren't opening up a generative AI tool.
Well, and the world wasn't so disruptive. It's like the disruption is like every day of every week now.
Yeah, and in fact, in 2020, it was in some weird way more coherent. The vast majority of the planet was facing, in different ways, the same kind of thing. You had a pandemic that was hitting just about everywhere in the world. And now you may have different levels of awareness about it, a whole bunch of different effects, but it was a thing that was happening to just about everybody. Today, I think that that's a very different state of affairs. Just today we're talking about economic crisis that's going to affect countries in very, very different ways. That's different than a pandemic, but might be similar in that increasingly you're having this uniform sense of change that's happening all of a sudden. So I think the corollaries are interesting.
Are there corollaries between an economic war, which is what seems to be underway now, and the info war? Like, does one feed the other in the same way that a pandemic fed in misinformation?
Yeah, so I think of information and information infrastructure as this layer. And it's a massive and critical layer that I think that we've probably taken for granted in many ways over the course of the last 100 years. And in the last several decades, it's become a pretty integral part of the way that we engage with one another, the way that we make choices about the things that we support, about the way in which we organize with one another. And I think the vast majority of that happens on a smaller and smaller number of platforms. And so actually, as I step back and think about your question, the way that I think about it is it's a consistent layer that has become more and more important in everyday life.
It's hard to talk about it and quantify it until you say, how many friends do you think you've lost because they've changed? It's kind of insidious that way.
100%. Yeah. It's fascinating when you think about, come back to your comment about the pandemic, how many times did you have a conversation with someone in your family that you felt like, I just can't talk to anymore? And now fast forward to today, and the kinds of conversations that you aren't having with the groups of people that you may have been talking to, not just one-on-one, but actual groups of people. And I think that's the dichotomy of what we're seeing and have been for a very long time. I saw this thing from 2015, a woman who studied, her name escapes me now, about the use of the smartphone and how it's making it harder and harder to have conversations. And at the same time as we're increasing our connectivity, we're fueling our loneliness. that was 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Fast forward to today,
Yeah.
and the level of disconnection I think that people feel,
Yeah.
including young people, I think is pretty enormous.
Yeah, people just sort of fall away from you. It's such a bizarre phenomenon. So if we were aware of it, which we were during COVID, I know everybody tried to forget about COVID, but did anybody think about, the state of our minds in the last little while and what everyone's been through? And has that been attacked in any way in Canada by policy?
So I'd say that the way in which we thought about the infodemic, which was the term coined during the pandemic, which was this idea that the information that we're consuming about the pandemic is making it more difficult for people to arrive at conclusions about what is accurate and inaccurate. Mm-hmm. And some of that is simply people's uncertainty. They just didn't know what to believe. Then there's conflicting information, which made it more difficult for people to sort it out.
We had long lockdowns, and media didn't do a great job at not demonizing people who had doubt and disagreed.
Correct. And actually, that gets to the platforms themselves, which is these platforms are actually really, really good at a couple of things. They're really good at sorting people into baskets that are smaller and smaller groups, and they're really, really effective at it. They're good at it because that's the way in which they make money. So it's a really useful way of dividing people into these groups. And so if you think about the inability of our system of information to be able to help people understand what's happening around them, that's because people are changing and the information's changing. And then you think about the platforms that we're using at being really effective to do what they were designed to do. It's not maliciously designed, that's just what they were designed to do, getting more efficient at actually doing it. Well, that's a bit of a perfect storm in helping people sort information out and build bridges across each of these smaller and smaller baskets that they belong to.
So we've been talking about this now for about 5 years, and now we have a neighbor, or at least an administration representing the neighbor, that is saying some pretty nasty things and, wants to march in and claim us. Why are we not ready for any of this? The military has its own problems. That's procurement. We've known about them for a long time. But there's no military solution. There's no all of government solution, unlike many of our allies. Why are we so asleep on this?
Yeah, so I think your last question actually picks up on that, which is that infodemic that took place, and now we're talking about hybrid conflict. We're talking about a hybrid war, and
which we've had from other places other than America. But.
Correct, and for a very long time.
Yeah,
I think the scale and velocity problem is already really well studied, which is it's huge. The distribution of information is so rapid, and so as a consequence, you ask yourself, why aren't we ready for the way in which information that comes at us very, very quickly and hits us at scale can actually affect us? So I think that we've been a bit complacent.
Yeah, we weren't interesting for a very long time, right, to anybody.
Yeah, and we got comfortable with the idea that we don't really need to worry about it so much. And that's not true for everybody. Many people were worried about it. Investments into the national infrastructure when it comes to media and journalism. And there are programs and initiatives in government that were doing some spot treatment work. So it's not because people weren't making an effort, but the scale of the challenge far outweighs the scale of our investment for a very long time. And I think that we didn't believe it to be as central a piece of infrastructure as we probably needed it to for a very long time. And so we got flat-footed.
So is that because we didn't monitor, or we did monitor and we didn't share what we knew? Or what have we not invested in that we should have?
Yeah, so look, I think that we've known for quite some time. You take a look at extremist narratives in this country. We did a study a long time ago in my prior roles around the growth of extremist narratives in Canada. And what we found then was a large proportion of them are coming from down south. They weren't made here in Canada. They were proliferating here in Canada, but they didn't originate here. That's a known consideration. But then what are you going to do about it? And you're beset by a bunch of problems in the what are you going to do about it category.
We don't really have the tools, do we?
Well, there's a tooling problem, and then there's a problem with open societies, which is it's a feature that you're open, which means that as a consequence, the way in which you might deal with it in a closed society is you just censor it, eliminate it, and thank you very much, goodbye. It's a much harder challenge in an open society.
Because a lot of people will hear about monitoring conversations, and that's a problem.
Yeah, so very easily you could see those tools turned into surveillance that's harmful, as opposed to the kind of surveillance that we think about in the medical community. It's the kind of surveillance that could be harmful and impinge on very appropriate liberties that people should hold dear in our democracy. And so there is a real challenge in this idea that in open societies, how do you manage the challenge of the open society with the openness and appropriate freedom and liberties that people are circumscribing to, while sorting out the stuff that's harmful.
So we've had a good example during the election campaign of a bot activity that was suspicious and found, and then they were able to trace that to accounts that were known. It's not very sophisticated, really. I mean, considering how much resources the Canadian security establishment has. But does that give you some hope that at least we know about it now?
Yeah, I think that's a big step in the right direction. So I'd say a couple of things. One is having it be visible is about building confidence amongst Canadians that someone's taking care of observing when you're seeing people try to harm the Canadian public, where you're seeing a purposeful effort of manipulation of the public in whichever direction. So I think that builds confidence for Canadians that someone's able to watch it and then be able to call it out. That reinforces the notion of transparency. And I think the thing that it does, which I think is the hardest treatment, but the one that is most important, is it builds cognitive resilience. It actually builds resilience amongst the public. It
identifies it as a problem.
Correct.
Too. It's like cyber attacks. We didn't talk about them. We still don't really talk about them. Companies don't talk about them. So people don't understand how often we're under attack.
Yeah. And when you do talk about them, it raises people's observation of that as a challenge so they can actually do something about it. And that's true for human beings too. When you raise visibility that there is a purposeful effort to manipulate you, people will do the right thing and they will raise their own understanding of the problem. So you got to raise it and make it visible so that people can increase their cognitive resilience.
You know, it's interesting because one of the other insights we got from the research that we did was that people are believing in conspiracies for a good reason. They want to engage in public discourse, and they're naturally curious. What they might not have is the ability to trust expertise or read a lot, dig deeper. So do you think that if we are starting to talk in public, and let's hope that this continues after the election campaign, that goes some way to moving the people who are in the middle into the area of doubt?
So I think that there are two different, yes, I think that there are two very productive things that are happening. The first is we're acknowledging that if you ask most Canadians as to whether or not they want to have more direct decision-making in the direction their country's taking, I think overwhelmingly, they're going to tell you yes. Mm-hmm. That's beset by the problem that the vast majority of them will also believe that no one's listening. So they want to have more of an impact. They want to have more of a say, but they don't believe people are listening. And that's your trust and confidence question. Right. They just don't believe that they don't have confidence in the system around them, in politicians and in others, that they're going to actually reflect their choices, their inputs into the decision making. So that's one set of problems you got to tackle. That means that people care.
Yeah.
That's huge. That's a massive asset that we should not squander. The second, and there's a second, which is the tools that we're using to engage people focus on a really small part of the population.
Or it feels like we're doing like slappy tests at a knife fight. Like we just don't have the tools.
So the tools are part of the problem for sure. And then the platforms are another part of the problem, which is they're made for a small number of people to be significant contributors.
Right.
And everyone else in a very low friction way is clicking like and share.
Well, and we have to rely on like Russia or China or America to do something because they're the hosts of the platforms, right?
Well, that's it. Exactly.
So, like Canadians don't have any skin in that game.
And that's the third part of the story that I don't think we've really come to, which is we've ceded a bunch of sovereignty by having the platforms that we use on a day-to-day basis be ones that we just don't own.
Do you think the Americans could be a real threat? I mean, we know well that the Russians are active, the Chinese, the Iranians, the Indians, governments. Other than MAGA, which, Trump says something and, all of a sudden we get a lot of attention from them. Do you see a day when the state is involved the way it is in Russia in attacking our sovereignty and trying to, undermine our resilience?
So the way I think about this is countries are always trying to influence each other.
Right.
Happens every day.
Yeah, spycraft goes on all the time.
And forget even the clandestine stuff. Leave that aside for a minute. Just overt influence. It happens all the time. You should follow my rules, whatever those rules happen to be. You should sign this agreement. You should participate. We're selling each other on a regular basis on the things that advance our interests. That happens in international affairs every single day. It happens between businesses and communities. We call it advocacy, and we do it all the time.
It's elite to elite, though.
So the population is regularly engaged through the broadcast approaches there.
Right.
Oftentimes elite to elite, but sometimes we want to create a groundswell of support. And so we will advance that in all sorts of different ways. Call it billboards, call it TV ads, call it online social media marketing.
Right.
That's happening all the time. So I would say that's a regular feature, and we should be expecting it. And I think people need to understand that it's happening so they can sort out in their own mind whether or not they believe it, whether or not they want to support it, and be attuned to the fact that it's happening. So I think that's actually critical. So in answer to your question, I think it happens all the time. I think we're trying to influence each other all the time. The part that that doesn't happen in the same way is the clandestine stuff. Mm-hmm. And so we saw a release of that report just yesterday from the site task force, the part that people are trying to hide or that people are using to try to deceive, people being states that are undertaking activities that are expected to be hidden on purpose, that are expected to deceive on purpose. And so I see less of that from our neighbor down south. I see more of the regular influence that we see using our open channels of communication and advocating for an interest that they see. And you see it in statements, you see it in media broadcasts, you see it in positioning. I see more of that than I see of the clandestine stuff, though that happens, but I see less of that from the South.
It's not illegal, right? Because, I mean, there are businesses popping up all over the place that companies can hire to, bot attack the reputation of, their opposition. So it's kind of like a mercenary business at this point that, even if the American government wanted to engage in that to try to, pit Alberta against Quebec or, anything, something like that, they could pretty well hide that by hiring a mercenary group.
They could also do it right in the open. They could do it all in the open. They don't have to hide it, right? You can make it visible and position that this is something that you would like to see happen, and it's a particular policy they'd like to see happen. And I would argue it's not very expensive to do it in contrast to the outcome that you're obtaining. So it doesn't even have to be clandestine. It doesn't mean the clandestine stuff isn't happening. It just means that it's not required in some cases. And in this one, it's all out in the open.
Yeah. How frustrated are you? Like you've attacked this from the very beginning. You worked at the Canadian Embassy, and were you responsible for those cheeky tweets at one time that came out of that embassy?
Was not. I wish in some cases
they were so good.
There was some really good stuff that came out in that 2012, 2013 era.
It was amazing. Yeah, I actually had a friend that was there, and I thought, "Is this you?" Because this is so
it's
not
great.
the government of Canada. It was great, and it got a great following too.
Yeah.
But you've spent time there. Yeah. You've spent time working in communications in Afghanistan and Kandahar. Yeah. Why doesn't this ever rise higher on the list of needs? Yeah. Why is it always the nice to have at the bottom?
So I think it was easier for us to not worry about it. We didn't feel like we needed to. It wasn't the most critical thing at the front of the docket of the problems you had to solve for a very long time. I just don't think the cognitive domain is one that we've prioritized with the level of resources that are probably required.
Do you think it's because the political parties count on it? I mean, they're very tribal, and they don't really want to cut off the financial stuff that feeds them, which is a lot of this same type of, emotional triggering information.
That's a good question. My intuition tells me so my intuition and my observations taken together are that they're people too. and they're subject to the same types of influences. I'll give you a concrete example. A couple of years ago, we did this study about the way in which Russian narratives are proliferating in Canada with respect to Ukraine. You know, we found a bunch of parliamentarians that were retweeting content on a regular basis that are repeating a bunch of narratives that specific states would like you to have as expected dominant opinion in the country. They're not doing it out of any maliciousness. They're doing it because they actually think that that's the perspective that they have. So in some cases, it's simply them just repeating narratives because their ability to understand where it's coming from is insufficiently high. So our literacy is too low.
Yeah. But the reason I ask that is like there are now laws that corporations have to report to somebody when they've been cyber attacked.
Sure.
There's no law around that, around misinformation. But the political parties exempted themselves uniquely in Canada from having to report on their cyber activity because they have incredible levels of data on us. So I wonder whether there's a disincentive for politicians and our political class to deal with this because they'd have to be more accountable themselves.
Yeah, I mean, the Hogue report pointed this out, was that actually there's a bunch of weakness here. And it's a soft underbelly, both on the finance side as well as on the ways in which, you know, all the way from candidate selection through to running in an actual campaign. There's some real weaknesses there that I think are important to stitch up if you're going to give people confidence that the system of governance is sound.
Because there's a great conversation going on in the country right now about new resilience, economic resilience.
Yeah.
Have you heard much of a conversation around information resilience?
Not nearly enough.
Yeah.
I would say not nearly enough. And it happens in the communities where, you know, you'd expect it to happen. It happens in journalism communities, and it happens in civil society groups, and it happens amongst some policymakers. But it's not risen to the level that I think it probably needs to in a world in which people are shaping their opinions on a regular basis. And I would say specific groups of people, young people in particular, who are shaping their opinions about whether they think the system of governance around us is the right one.
Whether democracy, yes.
Whether democracy is the right one. And so it's inextricably linked to our existence and our success.
Yeah.
And so I don't believe that it's nearly been sufficiently considered in light of the types of priorities that we have.
Yeah.
And it should be amongst the chief ones because it's the way that we engage with one another to decide that this is a system we want.
We used to know this. There were like propaganda during, you know, actual physical wars.
Yeah.
But government spent a lot of time dealing with the hearts and minds of the people back home so that there was support for whatever else they needed to do. So we did know how to do this, you know, before it got so complicated, I guess.
Yeah, to some extent, I think that's true. And then I think we lulled ourselves into believing that we exist in a world, you know, fall of the Soviet Union and the fall of the Berlin Wall, this immense opportunity for us to explore lots of growth, the reduction of trade barriers, the way in which we interacted with one another individually in our country, but also between states. It was a sea change from the prior 20, 30 years. And so you get lulled, I think, into this sense that I don't have to worry about that. That problem is over.
So if I'm a Canadian, I'm seeing a lot of stuff come over, you know, videos. You know, Rumble is a great source of information and talk, and I don't see the same ecosystem really in Canada. It's more reflective of what the American one is.
Yep.
Why don't we play offense in this? Like, why isn't there an information structure in Canada that is, you know, it doesn't have to be from the government. It probably shouldn't be from the military, but, you know, that is able to make money according to the principles that we want to broadcast. Why doesn't that exist here?
So I'll give you two different answers, and they might point to some areas that we need to invest in. The first is threat. So our perception of threat, I think, has been relatively low for a very long time. And in societies where you see that perception of threat be much higher, they've really organized themselves to sort out what a whole of society approach could look like. Finland's a great example of this. They teach media literacy across the whole entire spectrum, from young kids through to adult age. It is a formative part of people's education. It's not true here. Think about places like Taiwan that have faced significant external threat. They too have organized themselves to figure out what's the relationship between civil society and government, what does it need to look like in order to defend themselves against what they would perceive to be a significant cognitive threat. we haven't faced or felt like we faced that kind of cognitive threat. And so as a consequence, today is a moment of reflection to say, well, do we face that threat? Because this would be a great time to organize a whole of society approach. And I think you're right. It's going to come from civil society, by and large, who are going to ask themselves whether or not we are appropriately defended and figure out how to engage with governments. That's the first comment that I would make. The second is, I think we've gone through an era of really dominant platforms. Everyone used to watch the major television channels, and we all did the same thing. We watched the nightly news together.
I used to be on one, and I don't watch it anymore.
Exactly. And we all used to watch. We all used to watch when you participated in that, and as a result, we were listening to what you had to say. That turned into this multi-channel universe, and now we are, I think, are coming back to dominant platforms. If you ask young people today, if you ask old people today, if you ask everybody today, where do you get your news and information? A lot of people, the vast majority, are going to tell you they get it from online and social platforms.
Yeah, they don't necessarily recognize it as news. It's just information.
It's just
they
content.
feel well informed.
That's right. Yeah. And it's just content that's coming at them. And it's likely being given to them through a platform, one of maybe a handful, that has an algorithm that's deciding what content they're going to see and what they're not going to see. And it's a ton of availability on that content on this small handful of platforms. None of those are Canadian owned. Not one of them.
True.
So we've made no investments in creating a platform that's distributing the lion's share of content to the vast majority of Canadians.
Again, we offshored our capabilities.
Gone. We don't have one.
Could we have one?
I think we absolutely could have one. And I would argue now is the perfect time to create one. Now is a moment where the kinds of values that we have as a country, the opportunities that exist to bring a whole array of people together from different walks of life, this Canadian experiment that we have is a wonderful place to build a platform that could create the conditions for people to come together as opposed to be separated. So I think we've got a wonderful opportunity in front of us.
You know, I'm hearing rumblings that there are certainly, individual Americans, but American corporations that are thinking they need to remove their data from American sites and move it to Canada because we have different privacy laws. They can't, if the state wanted, after 9/11, the state gave themselves the power to, dip into this stuff that we don't have the same level of.
Yeah.
I wonder if that's an opportunity too. Like if the world is getting concerned about the power of the American state to dip into all this data, if they're interested in, after Elon Musk has gone on his tear, is that an opportunity to be the home of, higher privacy?
So, I think the way that we've approached this problem has been probably slow.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Like it's been a while. And so—
How long have you been doing this?
Yeah, exactly. It's been pretty slow. And so we've been talking about, the Privacy Act for a very long time. So is there an opportunity? Absolutely. Are we going to prioritize it? I think that's a really important question for us to answer, because the question you're asking about whether or not there's an opportunity as a function of our values to become a place where privacy has a higher order, and as a consequence, people would be more willing to do business.
But we need a truthful conversation.
Yeah.
Like we need our leaders to tell us what the hell's going on.
Yeah. We need to push our leaders to say this is a priority. And as a result, how are you going to sort this out?
Farhaan, thank you.
Thank you, Kevin.
Well, a huge thank you to Startwell for providing our studios and facilities for this conversation today. We are very, very grateful. And also to Nicholas Webster, who composes our music. I'm Kevin Newman. Thanks for sharing your time with us.